On 5 News, after 25 years, a breakthrough in the search for Ben Needham. British police looking for the missing toddler on a Greek island say they've found one of his belongings.
It is my professional belief that Ben Needham died as a result of an accident near to the farmhouse here in Herakles, where he was last seen playing.
Also taking the fight to Islamic State. Coalition forces, including the RAF, begin their assault on the Iraqi city of Mosul. The Health Secretary unveils a new scheme to help parents whose pregnancies go wrong. They finally made it. Britain takes in teenage refugees ahead of the demolition of the Calais jungle camp. And a victory parade in Manchester for Britain's record-breaking Olympic and Paralympic heroes. Hello, welcome to 5 News. I'm Matt Barbett. 25 years after he went missing on the Greek island of Kos, police have told the family of toddler Ben Needham they now believe he was killed in an accident close to their farmhouse. British investigators have been carrying out fresh searches of the area for the past 3 weeks, and today they revealed they found an item Ben is thought to have had with him when he was last seen. Our chief correspondent, Tessa Chapman, reports.
They dreamed of seeing him, holding him again, that one day he would come back. But now Ben Needham's family must try to digest the worst of news. After a tip-off that the toddler might have been killed in an accident, police began a 3-week dig on 2 sites on Kos, and today announced they found no remains, but enough clues to reach a conclusion.
It is my professional belief that Ben Needham died as a result of an accident near to the farmhouse here in Herakles, where he was last seen playing. An item found on Saturday the 15th of October is of greater significance to this investigation. It is our initial understanding that this item was in Ben's possession at or around the time that he went missing.
Police wouldn't confirm what the item was, but said they'd shown it to his mum, Kerry, who was distraught. A devastating development after a tireless campaign to find Ben, keeping his profile high all over the world in the fear he'd been abducted. But it all changed last month with a claim that a Greek man who died recently accidentally ran Ben over with his digger, then buried him. Kerry Needham was warned by police to prepare for the worst.
I'm angry. I could have grieved and I could have done something with my life instead of having a life on hold and not being able to do anything or focus on anything and live in this nightmare. It could have been ended 25 years ago. I could have probably forgiven that person back then, but now, no, it's 25 years of misery.
Ben's sister spoke during the search.
None of us want to believe that we're going to find something there, because that's 25 years of fighting and pain and hurt that could have been ended 25 years ago. We're a family that's lived in hope, and what do you do when that hope's all gone?
Because now they know Ben probably didn't grow up, and the family faces a new kind of agony, the prospect of starting to grieve. Tessa Chapman, 5 News.
A huge military operation has begun to attempt to retake the last remaining Iraqi stronghold of so-called Islamic State. The long-planned assault on Mosul began in the early hours and involves tens of thousands of Iraqi and Kurdish troops who were backed by the US and also the RAF. In a city the size of Birmingham, there are fears, though, that more than 1 million people could be caught up in a long and bloody battle, as Layla Hayes reports.
Kurdish troops firing on the city of Mosul. So-called Islamic State now under attack from both artillery and mortar fire. Spirits among the Kurdish fighters seemed high with this display for the cameras. The convoys of Iraqi and Kurdish forces, helped by US-led coalition airstrikes. Announcing the start of the operation, the Iraqi Prime Minister appeared on state TV. The hour of victory has arrived, he said, and operations for the liberation of Mosul have begun. Earlier, the Iraqi military dropped thousands of leaflets over the city, telling residents to keep calm and tell your children it's only a game. But the United Nations has expressed fears that the battle for Mosul could result in a humanitarian crisis. Mosul is Iraq's second largest city and is now the last city in the country to be held by Islamic State. It's estimated there could be as many as 1.5 million people left inside, and it's thought up to 1 million civilians could become refugees. The first stage of the operation is to encircle Mosul. Joint forces will do this from the north, east and south. It's thought the west will be left open deliberately, allowing Islamic State fighters a way out of the city. Drones will then pick off IS fighters as they flee. It's hoped this will limit the number of civilian casualties. Such a complex and dangerous operation could take months, but analysts say it's crucial to the stability of the region.
The defeat of ISIS in Mosul would represent a hard blow, a shattering blow. It would mean the beginning of the end of the territorial Islamic State in Iraq.
It's thought many Iraqis may now flee to Turkey or even Syria. The battle to retake Mosul may get rid of Islamic State, but in terms of civilian casualties, it could come with a high cost. Layla Hayes, 5 News.
Well, people in the besieged Syrian city of Aleppo have been given some relief after Russia announced plans to stop airstrikes for a few hours at least later this week. There's been relentless bombing in the city since a ceasefire collapsed last month as Russia and the Syrian government said they're trying to drive away rebels. Hundreds of thousands of people are still trapped there, and Moscow says there will be an 8-hour pause in airstrikes on Thursday to let in humanitarian aid. Sir Cliff Richard is among a number of high-profile people who've called for those accused of sexual abuse to be given anonymity. The singer was joined by MP Nigel Evans and broadcaster Paul Gambaccini as they addressed Parliament. Separate cases against them all were dropped by prosecutors. However, some victims' groups say the move could stop potential victims from coming forward. And police say the death of a baby boy who was mauled by a family dog in Essex is unlikely to be treated as a criminal investigation. Archie Darby died and his brother Daniel J was seriously injured in the attack in Colchester last week. Families of children who are injured or brain damaged at birth are to be offered fast-track compensation by the National Health Service. The Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, says he hopes it'll stop parents from having to endure long waits for settlements in the courts. And he wants staff to be able to speak more openly about any failings so that lessons can be learned. Here's our health correspondent, Catherine Jones.
3 years ago, Lauren's baby daughter Jada died in her womb the day before she was due to be delivered. Lauren says the staff on the maternity ward didn't try to close ranks or make excuses. Like her, they just wanted to discover why it had happened.
They didn't ever defend themselves. I was quite lucky in that they really showed me that she mattered. And I remember when she was born, the midwife actually started crying. And I thought, why is she crying? You know, she's a professional person, she shouldn't be doing this. But actually, it's because the baby meant something to her too.
But all too often, midwives and doctors don't feel they can be open, out of fear their hospital will be sued.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Now the Health Secretary has plans to make NHS maternity care the safest in the world.
No, I felt sorry for my wife because when we had our number 3, I was Health Secretary.
And he wants to start by dismantling the culture of blame and litigation.
That we make people fight through the courts, typically 11.5 years to get compensation for a brain-damaged baby. And we want to find a better way of doing that, which is better for the parents, giving them access to compensation earlier, but also better for doctors and nurses who are very traumatised by what, it's awful for them in those situations.
So the government plans to make sure doctors and midwives can safely admit mistakes without the risk of that being used against them. That there's a system which spreads the lessons learned from that across the NHS in England. And there's a fast-track compensation scheme which avoids legal action when a birth does go wrong. But midwives leaders warn it doesn't tackle the greatest threat to maternity care, that England is 3,500 midwives short of what's needed.
Without enough midwives to care for women and also to participate in the multidisciplinary training, in the case reviews, the benefits of this strategy will not be delivered.
Medical errors harm around 500 babies at birth each year. This new approach should cut that number and reduce the burden on families and on the NHS when mistakes do happen. Catherine Jones, 5 News.
Now, after 3 resignations and weeks of speculation, we've heard from the new chair of the Child Abuse Inquiry in England and Wales today. Professor Alexis Jay has insisted she won't try to reduce it in scale, but it won't be exactly like a normal public inquiry either. Our political editor, Andy Bell, is in Westminster now. Andy, what does she mean?
Well, Matt, I think the chair of the inquiry, Alexis Jay, as you say, she has said that she does not want to reduce the scale or the scope of this inquiry in any way. But what she has said is that it might not be possible to have what she described as the full traditional model of a public inquiry with open evidence being given in open session and cross-examination of that evidence, that it might not be possible to have that sort of model applied to absolutely every organisation and institution which the inquiry is supposed to be looking into. She said if they were to do that, it might put the inquiry at risk.
If we were to pursue the traditional public hearing model that people associate with inquiries of this kind to the thousands and thousands of institutions in England and Wales, we would fail.
Still not entirely clear, Andy. I mean, given that this was set up by the Prime Minister, is it embarrassing for her personally that it's still a bit of a mess?
Well, as long as it remains a bit of a mess, as you've said, then I think it is potentially embarrassing for Theresa May. And there was one specific issue today that will also come back and put pressure on her, I think. Her successor as Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, was called today to the House of Commons to answer an urgent question about what happened in the case of Judge Lowell Goddard, the previous chair of the inquiry, who resigned earlier this year. And the question was asked, who did the due diligence? Who asked the questions? Who ensured that the proper process was observed so that they were sure that Judge Lowell Goddard was the right person to chair this inquiry? And of course the answer left hanging in the air was it should have been the previous Home Secretary, Theresa May.
Andy, thanks very much indeed. Still to come on the programme. The lucky ones, the refugee children who've escaped the Calais jungle and finally made it to the UK. And honouring Britain's Olympic and Paralympic heroes. We're live in Manchester for that victory parade. That's coming up with more stories after the break. Welcome back, you're watching 5 News. A group of 14 teenagers who've been living in the so-called Calais jungle have arrived here as part of a government scheme to help unaccompanied children. The youngest is 14. Some of them have fled the Syrian civil war, and all of them have close family members already in the UK, as Warren Nettleford explains.
This is the end of a journey that for some began thousands of miles away. 14 teenagers today reunited with their families in Croydon after living without their parents in what's known as the Calais jungle. This is what they left behind. Aid agencies and charities describe conditions as desperate and squalid. Lord Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, has been a leading advocate for refugees in the camp, and he came to Croydon to meet them as they arrived.
Part of the message we want to go out from today is not only the welcome to the children, but a message also to our society and our government. We know you can sort this, and we want it done pretty quickly, because the risks of not doing anything are very, very high in terms of the well-being and even the lives of the children in these camps.
Campaigners have accused the government of dragging their feet, but a recent change to the law now requires the government to relocate unaccompanied refugee children from Europe. The children arrived at the Home Office in Croydon, and so local churches like this one have been keen to offer advice and support to reunite those separated families. The French President François Hollande plans to demolish the camp in the coming weeks. Those remaining will be dispersed to centres across France. But campaigners here are still putting pressure on the government to ensure families can be reunited.
The vast majority of people in Calais should claim asylum in France and stay there. It's 12,000 plus people. All we're saying is that of the 1,200 children who are in Calais, Britain has obligations to maybe 500-600 of them, and those should be honoured, and that's what we're calling for.
The jungle may be on Britain's doorstep, but this crisis is international. Today's child refugees in Croydon originated from Syria and Afghanistan. The government say they intend to transfer as many minors as possible. Warren Ettelford, 5 News.
Tens of thousands of people have turned out in Manchester to cheer on Britain's Olympic and Paralympic heroes. The record-breaking athletes are getting to show off their impressive tally of medals from Rio de Janeiro during a parade right now, before doing it all again in London tomorrow. Dominic Reynolds reports.
At the end of this rainbow, there really is a lot of gold. They performed in the Brazilian sunshine, but our athletes are celebrating in some very British weather. Led by a rain-soaked British Lion, Team GB and Paralympics GB are travelling 2 miles through the streets of Manchester, and they're being welcomed by up to 150,000 people. Not everyone can contain their excitement.
Gives the opportunity for people to actually see everyone in real life, not just on the TV. You know, we appreciate them watching, and obviously today there's obviously a big turnout today, so we're looking forward to it. You know, our big mission of ours is to inspire a generation. That's what we're trying to do.
It's so great for us to be with the Olympians as well. I think the fact that it's all together is so special, and you know, to have everybody here supporting us, it's just amazing to see.
I've never been to Manchester before, and coming up on the train I sat with the Kaiser Chiefs who are going to be playing later, so I'm really excited to say thank you to all the supporters who watched the TV, who shouted and cheered at us.
No Team GB since the 19th century had come home with as many as 67 medals, and no host nation had ever improved at the following games. But this team did, and a golden summer was made of moments like this.
Taking a breath.
Max Whitlock becoming our first ever champion gymnast.
Up high, good twisting.
Mo Farah falling down but getting up again to keep his 2 titles intact. Jessica Ennis-Hill returning to the track as a mum and winning silver. And our women's hockey team doing the unthinkable, winning on penalties. 2 weeks later, our Paralympians did us proud too. Ellie Simmons brought home 2 of the team's 147 medals, while Sarah Story, already a dame, became our most decorated Paralympic athlete too. Londoners may have hosted last time, but Mancunians get the first thank you this time. Our medalists came from all over the UK, and our all-conquering cycling team was made here in Manchester. The carnival will come to the capital tomorrow. Dominic Reynolds, 5 News.
Simon Viger is among the crowd in Manchester right now. And look, Simon, I know it's not Rio, but the weather's not been kind, has it?
Well, it's a Rio theme here, Matt. We've had a tropical downpour, sort of, but a bit of rain here in Manchester is not going to stop a party, is it? The floats are still coming up Cross Street towards Albert Square. And as you heard in Dominic's report, a lot of stars there. 67 Olympic medals, 147 Paralympic medals. Many of those medals made here in Manchester because the National Velodrome is here, of course, but unfortunately Laura Trott isn't here today, but a lot of stars are. And last year the main parade was in London. Tomorrow there's a smaller do in Trafalgar Square, and then the after party is at Buckingham Palace. Not sure if the Kaiser Chiefs are going there.
OK, Simon, thanks very much indeed. I'm sure we can hear them. Now, their long and tireless campaign brought justice against all odds, and today a group of women who lost sons and daughters in the Hillsborough disaster have been honoured by the Prime Minister. The Women of the Year award was accepted on their behalf by Margaret Aspinall, whose 18-year-old son James died in the tragedy. As Minnie Stevenson reports, she dedicated the award to the 96.
We've been fighting to get to the truth.
I want them 96 to rest in peace now.
Let's hope that's only the beginning of what's going to be done.
For 27 years, Margaret Aspinall has fought tirelessly for justice for the Hillsborough families who lost their loved ones that day. And today, the Prime Minister recognised their strength and determination by presenting Margaret with a special Women of the Year award.
We know that the family's fight for justice is not over. But it's thanks to their grit, their determination, their courage, that we now know the truth. Yes, Margaret, the truth.
Several of the mothers who lost children at Hillsborough and have campaigned for decades stood with Margaret as she accepted the award on their behalf.
we all think of our loved ones each day, you know. So to me, this is not a celebration as such. This is recognition of them 96, to me, which is more important.
Margaret lost her 18-year-old son James at Hillsborough in 1989. Since, she has put aside her own grief to fight for justice for the 96 people who lost their lives at Hillsborough. And this year, they finally got the truth, recognition that their loved ones were unlawfully killed. Today, after picking up the award, Margaret thanked all of the women who had supported her.
I remember years ago and think women were as strong as men. I think they've proven an awful lot. They're a lot stronger in some ways.
As they left, a standing ovation, a mark of respect for the women who would never have chosen the circumstances but were forced to take on the establishment and won. Minnie Stevenson, 5 News.
Still to come on 5 News tonight at 6:30, we'll be discussing whether suspects of sexual abuse should be allowed to remain anonymous. Cliff Richard has been campaigning for the law to be changed to protect the reputations of innocent people. Others, though, say that may mean fewer victims will come forward. We'll be debating the issue with a victim of abuse and a man who was wrongly accused in an hour's time. But that's it for now. Sean Welby will have the weather next. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.